Hi everybody, this is my video for the book review that I completed, which was Dwayne Bidwell's Short-Term Spiritual Guidance. And I was drawn to this book because it draws together two of his areas of expertise, which is spiritual direction and short-term pastoral counselling. And I am very familiar with spiritual direction. It is something that I have been trying to implement into my pastoral care context. I've done a lot of reading around it, and I even included a group spiritual direction or contemplative listening exercise as part of my DMIN project. So it's fresh in my mind and I enjoy it very much, but I have found that there are times when I'm sitting with someone and holding space for them, I guess in view of the more traditional model of spiritual direction, and have found myself lacking a little bit in terms of how to help someone move through what it is that they are experiencing without necessarily rescuing them, but giving them something to hold on to. And have wondered if short-term pastoral counselling might be able to inform a spiritual direction relationship, particularly in a pastoral context where we don't always have a lot of time to spend with people, and certainly not everybody on a long-term basis. And that is where this book comes in. And in fact, he makes the point right at the beginning of his book that often when people approach a spiritual caregiver, whether that is a pastor, a chaplain, or other caregiver for help, often they are then offering that help or offering spiritual direction more specifically in the midst of a myriad of other responsibilities. And so it's literally impossible to start several long-term relationships with care seekers in terms of spiritual direction, because we just don't have the time or the resource to do that. So he is saying you can actually bring together some short-term pastoral counseling tools into the spiritual direction relationship, and you can actually see spiritual direction occur within 5 or less sessions and have outcomes for the care seeker that are empowering and useful in their own life, and also in a way that releases the caregiver from needing to, spend a long time with every person who comes to seek care, or, they might unnecessarily refer to long-term care givers when they could help in a short-term context themselves. And so in the preface, he lays out his assumptions about spiritual direction, and it's clear in those assumptions that there are some tensions between the assumptions he makes and more traditional spiritual direction. However, he actually names that critique right at the beginning of his text. And I guess the way I would put it is he doesn't see those tensions as things that need to be resolved. But actually within the tension, there is this permission for the pastoral caregiver or spiritual caregiver to actually sit within the way the two different disciplines blend together, and like I said, provide a really useful way to address care seekers who often are approaching us themselves without necessarily wanting to enter into a sort of a long-term counselling process. So there is a great benefit with the text there. The chapter 2 begins with, I guess, the way that both approaches would come together in a foundational way. He speaks about knowing and unknowing. Obviously, for spiritual direction, the director very much holds the space from a position of unknowing. God is the ultimate director. Any questions that are asked are always questions that the director genuinely doesn't know the answer to. So they're not leading in any way, they're not suggestive in any way. And so solution-focused brief therapy as well comes from a position of unknowing, where it encourages the caregiver to lead from one step behind. But this is one of those areas of tension, because he actually makes, in one of his assumptions about spiritual direction, he says that the director can actually coach, can direct, can, be directive in the relationship. And so that's probably the way that the two different streams divert the most. So he says that the director can question, coach, and shape the conversation in deliberate ways. Traditional spiritual direction would say that that isn't the role of the director at all. But in order to bring the two streams together, that assumption is required. A couple of theological discussions that he has around the apophatic way, apophatic theology, which is prevalent in Christian mystic literature, which says that there are, some things we can know about God, but many more things that we cannot. Encourages the caregiver to be the humble co-laborer with the Spirit of God, who is the ultimate director. And he also has this really, I found very helpful exploration of kenotic theology, how the self-emptying Christ gives us or animates the metaphor for the self-emptying pastoral caregiver. And in the way that Christ didn't grasp for power, we also resist the temptation to be too directive, to lead the conversation, in that way. But for me, there was a tension between the fourth assumption about spiritual direction that I just brought, which was that the director can coach and question and lead the conversation, and then this idea of resisting the temptation to do so. That was a tension that I'm not really sure I understood how to resolve. But like I said, I think he basically says, don't try to resolve it, just operate within it. The third chapter is really specific about how do you apply short-term pastoral counselling into a direction, a relationship. It's very useful. It goes from like the first meeting all the way through to this is how a meeting will look, and into even what obstacles to short-term spiritual care relationships might look like. Again, chapter 4 and 5 are really practical. The later chapters, however, really look at the contemplative tradition and some of the spiritual disciplines that it can offer the care seeker who is wanting, or who is desiring spiritual transformation. So whilst the way that these two disciplines blended wasn't as overt in those last chapters, there still is a thread that runs through them. Overall, I found the book really helpful. Like I said, I found that it showed how I can bring the two approaches together. I can use short-term pastoral counselling in, a spiritual direction relationship that I know isn't going to last, for a long time, that it is only for a short time. And so it empowers me as the caregiver to sit within that tension and provides great solutions for the care seeker. So I really enjoyed the book.